Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome to the poem of the day for today, Saturday, August 23rd, 2025. Today, we're going to read from a poet who I was a little bit surprised that, as long as I've been doing this series, I have not yet read a poem from. There's scores and scores of famous and essential poets throughout not just the English language, but throughout world literature. And this is a poet who many people have heard of if they have not read anything by them, but I have not featured this poet yet in the series, and so it seemed like an opportune time to take our first foray into William Wordsworth today. So Wordsworth lived 1770 to 1850 and served as the poet laureate from 1843 until his death. He's an English romantic poet whose most famous volume probably was the 1798 Lyrical Ballads. And in the beginning of that text, he refers to poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And it's very hard often to define poetry or to set certain categories of what makes something a poem versus what makes something prose, especially as poets become more experimental in terms of form. But I think this idea of a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings is probably as good of a definition as I've heard, and it certainly is appropriate for romantic poetry more broadly, but also for the poem that I'm going to read to you today. And this poem comes from 1807, and it is I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. So this is I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie in vacant or pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils. Okay. This poem I've read multiple times throughout my life, but as you encounter works of art at different points of your life, you hear or experience them in different ways, and you have different things that you can connect them to that you have experienced or that you've read. And this reminded me of a Paul Tillich quote that I introduced to my class recently, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it because it's not in front of me at the moment. But he said something like, language has constructed the word loneliness to express the pain of being alone, and has constructed the word solitude to express the joy and pleasure of being alone. And I think you can hear that in a lot of romantic poetry. My students spoke a lot of transcendentalism when we discussed that. And transcendentalism and romanticism are not obviously the same thing, but they are neighbors. And in this poem by Wordsworth, in the first line, he says that he wandered lonely as a cloud. And yet, throughout the rest of the poem, the tone is admiring and overwhelmed and somewhat ecstatic with the things that it is that the speaker is observing in nature, and the things that he's observing welling up within his own soul. And so In the fourth stanza, this is 4 6-line stanzas, so it's a 24-line poem. In the fourth and final stanza, he speaks again of being alone, though not really using that word. And this is one, it's the kind of turn of the poem where it becomes reflective and where it moves through time. The first 3 stanzas describe that experience of seeing these daffodils and being so taken by the daffodils that they seem to be infinite. They remind him of mysteries of the cosmos like the Milky Way, and even other elements of nature like the crashing waves are beauty, but they're beauty of a lower order for him. He even expresses being so taken and overwhelmed by it that he couldn't imagine not being happy, right? A poet could not but be gay in such jocund company. That the joy that he's sort of personifying in these swaying daffodils is something that's like unbearably contagious. And within those first 3 stanzas, there's a lot of personification of nature, but in a way that I think, consistent with the Romantic poets, is shows that man is not separate from nature, that humans are a part of nature, not above it, and thus can be affected in these deep and irresistible ways. But when we get to that fourth stanza, he speaks of being on the couch, lying in vacant or pensive mood. And again, he doesn't use the word the word lonely here, but he is in a state of solitude. And to go back to that Paul Tillich quote, it's not a loneliness that's expressing a certain pain, but it's a loneliness wherein he's able to experience a pleasure because his mind and imagination are seized by the memory of this experience, almost a transcendental experience that he has with nature. It says they flash upon that inward eye, which is going to be very important for the Romantic poets as well, the power of the imagination, and that the imagination is not something that is, as it's often thought of, childish and naive or even fabricated, but that it's something that can connect us with things that are very real, but things that are unseen, often behind the surface and material reality of the natural world. And the last 3 lines tell us that he's in the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils. So it begins in a state of loneliness, the pain of loneliness, and after experiencing and feeling one with these dancing daffodils, and even being consoled by the waves, though they're of a lesser degree for him, then in moments when he is inside and taken by imagination, the memory of the commune with nature that he had transforms moments of loneliness into moments of solitude, because those moments of solitude bring with them joys and pleasures that remind him that while by himself he's not alone because he's a part of nature, they also provide the place for the mind to wander, which is something that I think, again, is so important for us, especially within today's world, to take time to sit and be kind of quote unquote bored, right? We often reach, even with the slightest bit of impatience or the slightest bit of downtime or the slightest bit of pensivity, we often reach for our devices, often under the kind of the lie of getting something done, of learning something, of reading something, of accomplishing something. But those are truly moments of loneliness because they never fulfill us. They always leave us wanting something more. Whereas this experience that the speaker has with the romantic aspect of nature is something that is like a gift that keeps giving back to him. It's something that he can return to. And become filled with pleasure, transformed by. That line of "then my heart with pleasure fills" reminds me of what Ronald Rolheiser said was a spiritual experience as being the swelling of the soul. And it's something that can occur through love, through a direct experience with nature, or even through the apprehension of a beautiful art object. So this, again, I think this is truly just a lovely poem, and one that speaks a lot to experiences in nature that are often hard to articulate and that are hard to pin down. They're experiences that I think are common to a lot of us and that we seek out and that sometimes creep up on us. But they're ones that remain incredibly difficult to communicate and to put into language. And that's what Wordsworth has tried here. And I think, by the famousness and the lasting power of this poem, has succeeded in a lot of ways. But I also appreciate the ways in which he allows the poem to be exuberant to the point that he risks being, as young people say now, kind of cringe. I don't personally find it kind of cringe. I'm charmed by it, but it's exuberant to the point of being really risky, which again, just taking that risk, I think, testifies to the power of that experience. Hopefully you've had such an experience and can also relate to what Wordsworth is expressing here. I find when I'm craving experiences like that, they can't really be orchestrated. They sneak up on me, and that makes them more valuable gifts because they can't be manipulated or scheduled. They work on their own time. So I hope you enjoyed the Wordsworth poem today, and I wish you all peace.